Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to our live stream today. I'm Jiaxing from the Google Developer Relations team. Welcome to our second edition of Startup Coffee Chat at Google Developer Space. Startup Coffee Chat is a monthly event bringing together startups from across Southeast Asia and South Asia to share best practices and learn from one another. This month's topic is scalable infrastructure. For today, we are really excited to have with us Henry, Strategic Cloud Engineer at Google Cloud, Maria, VP of Data Analytics at Ticket.com, as well as Shafraz, our Cloud Community Manager at Google Cloud. Today, Henry will kickstart our session with a 10 minutes presentation, and after that, we'll move on to a panel discussion followed by Q&A. You're welcome to leave your comments on our YouTube live chat or Facebook live chat, wherever you are tuning in from. Without further ado, let's welcome Henry. For his first presentation today, he will be sharing principles on how you can increase your startup's development velocity. The stage is yours, Henry.
Thanks, Justin. Hey everyone, my name is Henry Suryawirawan. I'm a strategic cloud engineer in Google Cloud. So today I'm going to be speaking about how to increase your startup's development velocity. Mostly are influenced from my previous experience working in a startup like a few years back. So let me introduce myself first. So like I said, I've been in Google Cloud for around 2.5 years, going for 3 years next year. And you can always find me online. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So if you like to follow about Google Cloud related stuffs, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Sometimes I post on Twitter, but not very active. And you can also find me on the website at henrysuryawirawan.com. I also recently started a podcast called Tech Lead Journal. This is something that was born out of my passion. So basically, the podcast has a theme around technical leadership and also technical excellence. And my plan is to invite a lot of guests from around the region and also globally to share their wisdom, their knowledge, and their experience. So if you like to hear about startup related stuff, I actually have the first episode talking about startup tech leadership. And you can just find the podcast on your favorite podcast app, or you can go to the website called techleadjournal.dev. And do let me know if you have any feedback. So let's start with the talk for today. So I basically have distilled 8 different so-called advice based on my experience working in startup on how you can actually boost your productivity within your startup development team. So the first one, I think this is one of my biggest lessons from the previous experience, is that whenever we work in a startup, we have to always have this question back in mind. Are we building something that actually people want? Is there any demand for it? And are there any usage that people are using the product? If you are not building something that people want, I think that this is one of the toughest question to answer, because you'll probably be wasting your time a lot by building something, spending your time day and night to build something that at the end of the day doesn't bring you any result, doesn't bring any traction to your startup. And worse, the software that you built, it might be the best quality software in the world, but if nobody is using it, then it's basically the biggest productivity drag. So you would want to find something that to work on that you feel can bring benefit for the users or for the business at the end of the day. So this is one of my biggest lessons, because in my previous startup, I also had this kind of a dilemma. We did see some usage, but it was not the highest traction that we would like it to be. So at the end of the day, I think we can consider ourselves wasting a lot of time building something that actually at the end of the day didn't bring any benefit to the startup. My second so-called nugget is basically around premature optimization. So as we all know in software development practices, right, doing premature optimization is actually the root of all evil. There are a lot of things that for us as developers, we think that we want to optimize, be it your architecture, be it your technology, be it your processes and things like that. But as a startup, right, which is by definition is still a small company that is trying to build a scalable and replicable business model, you would want to build something that is good enough that you can use to test with the market, with the users, not to actually over engineer and over optimize in order to, either like satisfy your pride, dealing with a lot of technologies or building the most complex system in the world. But actually, again, the idea here is to be able to validate your business goals, your products, your ideas, and things like that. Specifically, I also want to mention, because lately in the technology world, there are so many buzzwords, things like, for example, microservices. I would suggest for startup, don't start with microservices. If possible, just build either like a monolith or even like 2-3 different services. You don't actually need 10 or hundreds microservices to start with, because it will be overkill, and also it will be, again, productivity drag for your team. So the next nugget is around automation. This actually saved me a lot of time in the past, because as a startup, by definition, we are a small team, only few people, especially the engineers, which are very precious. You don't want to be doing a lot of mundane tasks that you have to be doing over and over again. You don't want to be doing like deployment. Every time you have to do a deployment, that it becomes a chore. You take like hours or even few days in order to do that. So invest in things like continuous delivery, continuous integration, infrastructure as code, automated testing, either like unit testing, functional testing, API testing, UI testing, and things like that. So I understand that you will not be able to invest all of them in one go, but do invest time in building some kind of automation capability in your team, because this over the time will be worth it. The fourth one, I would say, use serverless and managed services, especially if you're using any cloud provider, as much as possible. So in the past, I also tried using, like native services provided by the cloud provider. And also I have some infrastructure that I self-installed and self-manage. There is a big difference between both of these services. If you have to self-manage and self-install, maybe it's easy on day one, where you just maybe go to Stack Overflow or some documentation, follow the commands, copy and paste, and then it will work. But actually, there are a lot of other things that you have to take care about. For example, maintenance, patches, or for example, if the service has grown in terms of data size, in terms of traffic, then you will start to think about scaling it, right? So either like building a bigger cluster, or how do you actually clean up the temporary files and things like that. So using serverless and managed services actually will avoid that kind of extra complexity and maintenance. So you just pay per use, and basically the serverless and managed services normally also provides some kind of auto scaling capability. So again, this is the biggest productivity boost if, let's say, you can use some cloud providers out there. The fifth one is about observability. Coming from my experience in the last 10 years, I've been dealing with a lot of developers, and I realized most of them actually do not provide good observability for their software and applications. So by observability, I mean here like things like logs, application metrics, telemetry, things that you want to monitor in terms of usage of your application or potential problems that could arise from your software. And also things like traces. So for example, if let's say you have multiple services, you want to be able to correlate what actually happened for a particular user journey or a particular user request. So having things maybe in a centralized place where you can monitor all of this will be, again, a big productivity boost, because whenever there's a problem happening, right, you won't waste a lot of time, trying to hop around between machines, hop around between log files, hop around between, different types of database in order to find and deduce what actually happened to your software. So come up with a good observability strategy, come up with a good conventions in terms of your logs, and come up with some of good metrics that you want to monitor in terms of usage of your application. The sixth one is actually to aim for frequent small deployment. As a startup, you don't want to waste time, like building a feature for months. Sometimes we like to build a branch that we take like a few months and weeks in order to finish. As a startup, you should aim to have a frequent small deployment. The best one will be weekly, if not bi-weekly, so that you can always test your ideas, build the features gradually, and then test it as early as possible to the users. So there are many techniques that you can use for frequent small deployment. Things like CI/CD should be in place. You can also build things like feature toggles or even feature flags in order to be able to deploy something that is still in progress, but it won't be affecting the actual traffic to your production. The second one is about buzz factor. For those of you who are not familiar with the term buzz factor, this is actually probably start as some kind of a joke. So in any startup or any team, right, you have a number of people. Just imagine if one of them actually got hit by a bus one day and couldn't be able to come back to work the next day. So what will happen to your team or your startup? Will there be any chaos? Will there be any disaster? Or will you still be able to continue what you have been doing in the last few weeks? So in a startup, it's quite common that we have, for example, one person dealing with infra, one person dealing with the UI, one person dealing the backend, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is to be able to spread your knowledge among the team members, so that your buzz factor increase, not just like one person, right? Because if that one person is unavailable for whatever reason, maybe due to family reasons, sick leave, or whatever it is, you would still be able to continue with the remaining knowledge spread among your team members. So things like pair programming, knowledge sharing, building good documentations are some of the strategies for that. And last, I want to touch about autonomy versus, like anarchy, right? So basically, we like to think that in a startup, we want to have a lot of autonomy. We want to be autonomous. We decide whatever that we want to do. But actually, this is to the contrary of what a startup should do. A startup should not, like leave everything to the team members to decide, right? As a founder or maybe the CTO of a startup, you should think about what are your visions, what are the core visions of your startup, and you do not outsource that to everybody to decide. You set the principles, you set the architecture, you set the goals, and basically you don't let anyone go off those visions. And you can still leave room for them to decide if they want to, be able to improvise or be more creative in their day-to-day work. But the key here is that you don't give full autonomy that might end up in anarchy. So that ends my presentation of the 8 nuggets of my previous startup experience. I hope it's useful.
Hey, Shafaz, I think you're on mute.
Awesome. Thanks, Yasin. Thanks, Henry. Thanks for that fantastic presentation on your experiences working with startups and the things that startup founders also will have to think through when they are going through the whole journey. So along with Henry, we have Maria joining with us today for this panel discussion. Welcome, Henry. Welcome, Maria, to this panel discussion.
Hi, Samas.
Hi again.
All right. Thank you very much, both, for joining in with us. I think there will be a lot of value the audience can get from these two individuals who are professionals, have experience, tons of experience in different technologies and also scalable infrastructure as well. So big shout out to all our viewers joining with us today. So please do tune in with us till the end because there are some prizes, gift giveaways as well. Jiazin and the team have organized in the end. Please do stick around with us. And also, if you have any questions, most importantly, please do make sure that you comment in the live chat so we would be able to answer those after the panel discussion is over. So selecting suitable infrastructure for a startup is a key factor, but it always is not about technical nitty-gritties, but there are many other non-technical decisions also the startup founders will have to make as well. So to talk about the technicalities and also the non-technical aspects of this whole infrastructure journey, we have the panel discussion, and I think without taking much time, we can move on with the questions. So the first question is directed towards Henry, who's coming just after a presentation now, where he discussed about very high-level topic areas. But we would love to kind of explore a little bit more on the infrastructure. When it comes to infrastructure, a common theme is the computing power. So for startups, big or small, will have to use computing power to run their workloads. Henry, what are the type of best practices can you recommend when selecting computing offerings for a startup?
Sure. So again, I mean, in terms of definition, the startup, right? I understand there are many people who are probably in different stages in their startup journey. So I would refer to probably to the early stage of startup. A startup, by definition, I like the definition from Steve Blank. Basically, he's saying that a startup is a temporary organization trying to look for repeatable and scalable business model. And also to quote Paul Graham, he says that startup, the only important thing is actually growth. So looking at all these attributes that they mentioned, right? You don't want to confuse yourself with a lot of technologies related stuffs that probably are unnecessary to build this repeatable and scalable business model. I would advise first, depending on your team members, you should start with the technology that you are familiar with, right? So for example, if you're familiar with container, please feel free to use it. But if you're not, don't try to, spend your time trying to research and understand how container works and, trying to deploy that to Kubernetes, for example. That would eat up a lot of time and effort, and plus so many potential issues that you will find along the way. And again, coming back to the previous point that I mentioned in the presentation, I would suggest people to prefer serverless and managed services if you use any cloud providers, because again, you would want to leave all these extra stuff that you don't want to care about, that doesn't bring actually real much value to your business, right, in terms of validating your startup. And you want to leave them as much as possible to the cloud providers. So things like auto scaling, things like adjusting the size, things like maintenance patches and things like that. Leave them as much as possible to the the cloud provider, and you can over the time adjust it. Obviously, once you see a certain need for a certain particular service, for example, you want to use other technologies, then you can change that. And lastly, I would say invest in automation, because whatever compute offerings that you use, you will need to find a way to automate them rather than doing it manually.
Yeah. So I think there you have some very interesting best practices that you could use. Like don't go and try to do everything by yourself, but rather try to increase the velocity, which was the theme of what Henry was presenting as well. So Henry, so you brought up very an interesting topic area where a lot of people talk about containers these days. A lot of people talk about Kubernetes these days. Like it could be a startup developer, or it could be like a major enterprise as well. So these startups, when they're thinking about like DevOps, when they're thinking about automation, when they're thinking about all these containers, where it comes, like it also comes along with a concept called DevOps, CI/CD. It comes along with those lines, right? So in terms of DevOps and CI/CD, actually synonymously could lead up to Kubernetes as well, Jenkins and Terraform. So do you think, or do you recommend startups should start using these tools from day one? I know you mentioned that if you're good with containers, go ahead and use it. And then if you're not so good with it, just go ahead with whatever the serverless area. So do you think should these startups start using these CI/CD pipelines and Kubernetes, Jenkins, Terraform, all these things from day one? If you think yes, why? If you think no, why?
Yeah, I would like to answer that in terms of the understanding rather than the tools first in the first place. I think DevOps and CI/CD, those two are great concepts, and I would love to encourage every startup to understand the principles behind it and actually implement that in your startup day to day, right? So obviously, in the term DevOps and CI/CD, there are a lot of other tools associated with it. So things like you mentioned, Jenkins, Terraform, Kubernetes, Ansible, and so on and so forth, right? So the tools actually help once you know what kind of problems that you want to solve. So for example, let's take Jenkins for CI/CD, right? If you want to solve the, like increase the velocity of your application deployment, then implementing CI/CD is a way. And tools like Jenkins actually will help you to be able to implement that as fast as possible, because there are so many people using Jenkins these days. And you can find resources and documentations for you to get started. And straight away, you can have like a CI/CD automating the deployment of your application right away, right? But again, the tools is not the answer here. The principles you have to understand, right? So what is the actual goal that you want to achieve by using the tools? And again, I think generally, like I mentioned, automation is crucial. So anything that you can automate, use the tools as much as possible in order to bring you like a fast velocity. And do not try to overcomplicate beyond what you need, right? Because I understand it's cool to adopt the latest technology, but if you are overcomplicating yourself, you're basically just creating troubles for you along the way.
That's very true. I think that's a very good advice for the startups who are tuning in, and also all the developers who are tuning in as well today. Because, like when it comes to like a new technology, they think, "Hey, this is cool, the cool kid in the block." So we'll have to start using it, or else we'll be sort of will be not be considered as cool anymore. So I think it's good to understand what the concept is and then apply whatever that is relevant. So that was the answer Henry gave us. So from Henry, now we are moving into onto Maria. Maria is the VP for data analytics at ticket.com. So Maria has a lot of experience in terms of building data-related infrastructure, and she overlooks the data infrastructure at ticket.com as well. So Maria, can you tell us a little bit about how you have built, how your team and yourself been building data infrastructure, and also what are the type of challenges that you face along the way, and how you solve those as well?
Okay, actually, I really agree like what Henry said. I always tell my data engineer team that we should be very lazy. If you can automate the thing, just automate it. Don't make yourself like focus on the operational thing. So I'm agree with what Henry said before. So in terms of the data infrastructure, actually we are using a lot of Google Cloud technologies. So for example, like for the data infrastructure, we are using Compute Engine, we are using Kubernetes Engine, we are using Dataproc, also we are using Kubeflow. So in terms of the data ingestion, we are using like we have like the batch processing, and we also have the streaming processing. We are using PubSub, we are using Kafka, we are using Dataflow. So we are combining a lot of technologies, a lot of module, and to make a data platform, I would say. So because for us in the data team, it's very important to collect all the data from many sources and then put it in the one single source of truth where other people can access it. So it's very important to have like I can say 2 years ago when we built data team, I need to choose a technology that really user friendly, where the team can learn very fast and then they can produce something. So it's very important at that moment as a new team to produce something and in a very quick way. So I think it's very helpful if we can choose like a cloud provider where all the technologies can help us not only to do the data ingestion, not only to do the data warehouse, but also help us doing the AI machine learning implementation, such as the Kubeflow. We can use it to create our recommendation engine. So we have a lot of how you can say it. We have a lot of cases that we really need to optimize the technologies. So that's how we build our data platform.
Yeah, thank you, Maria, for sharing that with us and with the audience as well. So now you mentioned that you're using a lot of Google Cloud related tools, technologies as well within the data infrastructure. So I think so before choosing all these infrastructure, what type of challenges did you have that you had to overcome, or maybe tried to kind of solve using these technologies or the tools?
Okay, so the
That
first one, the challenges that we encounter was like the data was scattered everywhere. There is no single source of truth. And then the type of data could be different. We have unstructured data, we have structured data. That's the biggest problem that we had before. And also like there's no single source of truth, meaning every division in the company, they have their own version of the data. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we had before.
awesome. I think I cannot agree more on this because I have worked with a couple of companies, and I clearly understand how when you don't have the data in one place, it could be like there can be like a lot of data redundancies, and also there can be a lot of data could be like misplaced. Sometimes trying to figure out how the connection is gonna go can be like really challenging as well. So that's a very interesting point that you made over there, which you try to solve using the infrastructure that you have in place now. So now for Maria and Henry, now like when you are using all these tools, technologies which are available, maybe from different cloud providers, one of the main concern boils down to in startups is that the cost. When you're using infrastructure, because like recently at one of the accelerator startups, Google's accelerator startups, they mentioned about that they're running a lot of their machine learning workloads in their own machines, because like having those in the cloud can cost a fortune for them. So startups are very cautious about infrastructure costs. So how do you think, what are the sort of things that they could use in terms of lower their infrastructure costs, and what are your recommendations? What do you both think on that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start first. So obviously, if you're a startup, you can try asking for the startup credits from any of the cloud providers that you choose. That would probably give you some months runway for spending for the infrastructure. And also, generally, any cloud provider has services, things like services, serverless and managed services that you pay only when you use. So this is actually very critical. So imagine if, let's say, you spin up resources only when you need it. So you don't actually need to pay the extra hours where you don't actually use it. So things like virtual machines actually will cost you if you forget, let's say, to shut it down by the end of the day or over the weekend where nobody's using, right? Also, pay per use here can also refer to features like auto scaling from the cloud provider. So if you have suddenly a burst of traffic coming into your infrastructure, so the cloud provider will be able to spin up resources, and by the time you don't need them with lesser traffic, they can also reduce in terms of scale. And try to monitor the billing over the time. Last time I used to do like a bi-weekly and monthly kind of analysis, see how the billing is increasing or growing, any trends or any things that we can optimize. And don't forget, also cloud provider provides free tiers. So some products actually provide you with some generous free tiers. So for example, things like free hours that you can use every month, or free resources that you can use every month. So do understand what these free tiers are and use them as much as possible. And lastly, I think, yes, we want to be able to run as cheap as possible. The key, I think, still, again, automation is key. You want to be able to rapidly provision infrastructure and resources using things like infrastructure as code, like Terraform or Ansible, or whatever technologies that you use. Spin up resources easily, destroy the resources easily as well. And the next time you want to recreate the environment, you can easily just run a few commands and you'll get the environment straight away. So those to me are the keys on how to optimize the cost. Maybe Maria, you can add some.
In our case, one of the example is about like what Sasha said before, like for the data scientist development. Before we have everyone doing the development in their own server, but it was really not flexible. It was expensive. But once we move, like there's a technology that named Kubeflow. Once we move to Kubeflow, we can manage the cost, and then it is like auto scale. So there's no problem if sometimes they need to run the model where the model need to process a lot of data. We have no problem at all, and then we can put like auto shutdown, so make sure the billing is not going during the weekend, not going during the holiday. So it's very helpful. So this the changes that we need to did to make sure we can maintain the cost. Because sometimes some people ask me that, but Maria, how about the cost? Actually, there are some technologies that enable us to maintain the cost, and then for me, I monitor the billing daily, so not only weekly. So if something happen, if there's a leak, or if there's somebody need to do optimization, we can monitor it faster. So yeah, that's the important things for me.
Just
Awesome.
also want to
Yeah, Henry, go
to
ahead.
add on, like from my previous experience, I think the key here is also not to only have few people monitoring the usage and the billing, but have this awareness for everyone in the team, saying that, okay, just be responsible, whatever that you spin up, right? As much as was possible, think about the cost implications and how you can reduce that or be more responsible in terms of usage.
Yes, and then for us, we have like the billing monitoring based on their name. So every day we get the recap from what happened yesterday, and then we can see your name. Okay, so for example, Maria, this is the this is the money that you spent yesterday to do this kind of processing. So it's very important to make sure everyone aware whatever you are doing, there's a cost behind it. So it's very important.
Yeah, awesome. So I think both of you mentioned like very good. Leads up to a very good point where now if the workloads are not important, shut down your maybe the VMs, or maybe if you want to kind of like if you just monitor what's happening around, monitor your billing, etc. At the same time, what are your thoughts on using preemptible machines for startups? Should they use it or should they not use it in startups?
So I think you have to understand first what is preemptible machines, because again, like different cloud providers provide slightly different ways of providing this kind of a capability. So for those who are not aware of preemptible machines, so basically Google Cloud or even like AWS have this extra capacity in their data centers. Basically, the capacity are people like not using the cloud providers at the moment, right? So you have a lot of virtual machines and extra resources that people can potentially optimize. So they offer this extra capacity with a lower price. So sometimes it could be 70% cheaper. So this is what we call preemptible machine, or in AWS called spot instance, right? So the key first before using preemptible machine is you need to understand the characteristic of it. So for example, in GCP, right, preemptible machine is only up for max 24 hours, and it can be taken at any point in time with maybe just like 1 minute notice. So you need to be able to have a workload that can handle this kind of characteristics, be able to resume as much as possible. Let's say if the things happen and Google is taking back the resources, you want to be able to resume what you have done before, not to restart it over and over again, right? And sometimes it's good to mix, not to have just preemptible machine, but it's good to have like dedicated, like the master instances, while you have a set of preemptible machines to complement your cluster, right? In order to so-called get the benefits of both.
That's true.
So for us, we are using preemptible machine to process the image. So in our cases, we got a lot of image from our hotel partners. So we have this model to identify if this hotel image is a good or a bad image. And then since we have a lot of things to be processed and no need like to have it at real time, so we are using preemptible machine. So it's very helpful. And then from the cost perspective is very, very optimized. That's the thing that I love. So whenever talking about the cost, I will love it.
That's very true. I think like ultimately the company would be benefited out of like the costs and the cost savings and the profit that you make. That's fantastic. So now we spoke about cost, and now in terms of like startups, like there can be like a very high growth startups as well, where they will be focusing on the future, where they want to go. They'll have roadmaps, different roadmaps. There can be like different product features. They might think ahead. A lot of startups would think ahead how they want to move forward in terms of business. Along with the business objectives, they might want to consider about how their infrastructure or maybe the architecture could be also dealt with the existing with the pace where the business also coming in, right? So how do you think in terms of how they should structure themselves for the next stage of growth in terms of their architecture or maybe the startups? Do you have any best practices, any recommendations that you have? Question goes to both Henry and Maria.
Okay. Well, coming back to the podcast that I shared earlier, right? So I have one guest who is very experienced in startup. So he has this one unique perspective in order to be able to, like prepare yourself for the next stage of your startup growth, right? He called this rule is a rule of 50%. So basically, at any point in time in your startup, right? First, you have to think what are the stages that will be involved in the startup. And for each of the stage, you kind of have like this so-called metrics or goals in mind, right? The goals should not be too easy, but also should not be overly ambitious. So think of a number that makes sense. And then you plan your architecture, your infrastructure along with that number, right? And over the time, as you see your infrastructure and your startup grows, right? If the capacities or the metrics that you are aiming for has reached around 50% or more, you start to think about the next stage, right? In terms of like architecture, what do I need to do in order to hit my next stage number? Do I need to refactor? Do I need to re-architect? Do I need to choose a different technology? So all this will happen in different stages. And once you reach half of your stage, you start thinking about the next stage and do all the necessary stuffs that you need to do in order to implement that. And also, again, coming back to the previous advice that I gave, I might sound like a broken record now. Do automation, do monitoring, observability, so that you know actually things are growing, and you see your infrastructure is still capable of handling or not. And then you will start making a decision based on data rather than gut feeling or maybe some kind of panic happening. So yeah, do have those in place.
Okay. If I may add to that, Henry. So for me, whenever we are building a data product, either is a data warehouse or is a recommendation engine, I would love to make it as a phases. Make it as a phases, and then you should see and then monitor the result of it. So the cost is very important, but it's very important also to create a product that we can use and then we can get something from it first. So from that perspective, it's very important to have like create in phases, and then after that create what you can gain from that each phases, and then in the second phase or the next phase we make it better. So it's very important to have that kind of mindset, not only in the data team but also in the whole company. And then it's very important to also embed the data in every decision. So it's for us, it's very important if the business user can access the data easily. So that's from the data perspective how we can support the growth of the company.
Understood. So I think those are like very interesting insights into like how you should plan ahead for your startups in terms of the growth. I think a lot of questions coming in for us in the live chat for both Henry and Maria at the moment, and I think we can actually move into the questions now. So we can end the Q&A session and move into the questions which our viewers have asked. I think there are a bunch of questions coming in. So let me add Jiasin as well to the stream. And so, yeah, we have the first question coming in from Harizuan. Harizuan is actually our GDG Cloud Singapore lead, and he's also a Google developer expert. So Harizuan has some two questions, I think. All right. The first question Harizuan is asking, there's a constant fear of how features in a cloud provider could be depreciated, or maybe deprecated. How can a startup manage this risk?
So I think not just in terms of cloud providers, right? Any technologies could be obsolete. Sometimes it could be even months, right? Not years. So the key here is not to be too over cautious on using technology. Yes, there are some cases where cloud providers actually deprecate or even like remove the feature altogether. But having said that, right, cloud providers will not do it in like okay, next month we're just gonna turn down everything. They will provide some kind of a timeline for you. They will first announce and then some kind of roadmap for you to do. And sometimes they could over even like a migration path, right? The key here is actually to have a very good architecture in terms of your applications, right? If you design your applications in such a way that it is, for example, maybe modular, easily deployable, you won't be having this kind of risks and cautious too much, because then at the end of the day, you would be able to react to these kind of changes because for sure you have automation in place, you have good architecture, and you can replicate that in another cloud provider or even another technology. So that's my take on it.
If I may add to that, what I'm doing as an end user, because I'm the one who use the cloud provider, I would love to invite the people to present me about the roadmap. Actually, what will happen in this quarter, and then what's gonna be the long-term plan, and then how you gonna achieve it, and then what kind of features that you will release, or is it possible for me if I want to request for this kind of feature? So it's very important to always engage with the provider, and then it's always important to become the first one who knows like what happened and then what kind of new release. So that's the thing that I always do.
Yeah, I think there's another question from Harizuan, again pointing out to Maria, how is data being used to provide newer products, improvement to products? Data analytics is usually not a concern when building products. How to bring up top of the mind for engineers?
Okay, so for me, I won't start with the engineers first. I will start with my business user. I will start with my business user. I will start with the product team, and then how to influence them to start feeding them the data, feeding them the insight. Do you know that the features that you released like 2 weeks ago, this is the result, and then do you know that the customer journey is like this? So rather than just talk, but I give them the insight. So this is the result, this is the insight, this is how our customer hate it, or how our customer love it. So I just presented in a very beautiful chart and then let them see it. So it's gonna be totally different if you just talk. Oh, you should use data when make decision. They will forget tomorrow. Tomorrow they will forget, right? But if you give it in a very beautiful presentation and then you give it like periodically, they will they will like ask, "Wait, Maria, why didn't you send me the insight this week?" So that's totally different, right? That's part of how we embed the data into our culture.
Yeah, thanks so
Awesome.
much for sharing. Yeah, I think we had a lot of talk about making sure that whatever we are doing is not too expensive. So I think a third question from Harizan regarding that. So he said collecting data can sometimes be expensive to start or maintain. In terms of having the solution to grab the data in automatic fashion, how do you balance whether such data is needed?
I always tell to my team that we are here to support the business. Whatever we are doing should be able to support the business. If not, in the end, we're gonna be too expensive. We just the cost, right? So to answer the question, we always balance it with the business. Okay, if the business, if there is issue lah, we always start with that issue. If there is issue, then we have the justification why we need this kind of data to be processed, and then why we need this kind of data to be placed, for example, in our data warehouse, because we need to do detailed analysis, because we need to see what really happens, because we need to solve the problem by using data. So always start with the business question, always start with the business problem. That's the best way to do it. Don't start with your
So
ego. As an engineer, I have an ego. No, just put everything, just dump everything. Maybe someday we will need it. But no, we cannot do that. We start with the business problem. That's gonna be the best way to do it. And the best way to convince your boss actually.
just to add, maybe from the other perspective, like what you mentioned, right? Obviously, if you have some data, at the end of the day, it might be precious, it might not be precious. So there are different strategies on how you can collect the data, right? If you use tools, obviously they can extract out this data in as soon as possible. Or sometimes you just collect data and you just store it. So there are things like in Google Cloud, like cloud storage, where you can store it in, like the cheapest storage class as possible, right? And then you just store it. So over the time, when you see a need arise, either like from business point of view, or you just want to analyze a certain trends, you have the data available. And there are a lot of tools that can read this structured unstructured data from like files, cloud storage, and things like that, and then be able to produce insights. So in a way, don't overanalyze as well, because sometimes data is very important. So you don't realize it now, but probably in the future you might. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Maria, for those insights. And there's another question coming in from Jillian in Facebook. She's asking us, in order to scale up fast, is it mandate for the application to be lightweight and not to have a lot of processing logic or features?
I think it's not so much about application lightweight or not, because obviously you have some applications that is heavyweight, like for example image processing, like Maria mentioned before, right? By default it is compute heavy and it takes time, and I would consider that as heavyweight. What I would want to probably paraphrase the question is about your architecture or your workflow, right? It has to be as lightweight as possible to the users. But at the back end, right, you can use as much time, as much compute resource that you want in order to process the workload. So asynchronous kind of request response is a key. So let's say if you can do things in asynchronous manner, don't try to build a synchronous request response, because that will give from the point of view of users, right, your workload is heavy. But if you can return as soon as possible, give back a response, but saying that we are processing either your order or your workload right at the background, that will be good. So I think the key here is to come up with an architecture that is so-called lightweight from perspective of user, but still at the end of the day, serves whatever the purpose of that feature, right? But having said that, there are some serverless products that can benefit from this kind of lightweight capability. Things like, for example, App Engine, Cloud Run, right? They will be able to spin up faster resources if, let's say, your workload is not like taking a lot of time during startup and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Henry, for that insight. And I think, Jiasin, if I'm not mistaken, we can have another one question, right?
Yep, let's do a last one.
Yeah, awesome. So,
So-
Jiasin, you can pick it.
Yep, okay, let's go with this. So Huashin asked, may we know the tool you use to monitor the usage optimization? I
Okay.
think,
So-
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, Maria.
for us, actually, we are using several, like we extract the audit log. We are using a BigQuery, and then we extract the BigQuery audit log, and then we show the data in our BI tools. And also we are using Stackdriver to monitor the usage. And so actually it's a lot of things, because once we have the raw data, it's very easy for us to create it by ourselves. What kind of metric that you want to monitor, and then either is a billing, or is there any specific modules that you want to monitor in terms of the usage, in terms of the billing. So for us, we like it to make the metrics by ourselves, and then we show it in our BI tools.
So I think the question here is not so clear in terms of what is the usage, right? There are a lot of things that we've discussed, like today. For example, if you want to monitor the usage of the billing, so depending on the cloud providers, you'll have a console, on the web page that you can see. You can also set a budget threshold and things like that. That will give you an alert. And like what Maria mentioned, it's quite common for GCP users to dump the billing data, export to BigQuery, and then from there you can use like either Data Studio or any other business analytics tool that you use in your company in order to provide dashboard or charts for you to visualize. And obviously application usage is another area. Again, I would encourage for you to think about what metrics that you want to capture from the usage of your application, and then from there you can start building like either like logs or even like custom metrics that you can put in Stackdriver, which is native in Google Cloud Platform. And then from there, you can, again, build dashboards, or you export that out to another tool like BigQuery and monitor that over the time.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think just one last comment. Xian Liu asked, so this is to Henry, who in your tech journal interview mentioned the 50-50 rule.
Yeah, so it's not actually 50-50 rule, it's actually rule of 50. So it's actually episode 1. The guy name is Jerome Pudovine. So if you want to know more, do check it out. It's at techleadjournal.dev. If you want the full URL, is /episodes/1. Basically the first episode of my podcast.
Wow, nice. Yeah, and I think with that, I'll be wrapping up today's session. Thank you so much, Shafraz, Maria, and Henry, for your time and taking time to share your insights with the community. I'm sure everyone learned a lot, especially to keep your costs down for startups. Yeah, so any last words you would like to share?
So if you would like to continue the conversation, do find me on social media, LinkedIn, or wherever you can find me. So just ask me any questions that you want to ask further.
Yeah, and I think for Maria, we'll find you on LinkedIn as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Jiasin. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Henry. Thank you for joining with us. So, Jiasin, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. Thanks so much again, once again, to all our speakers. So if you like to watch today's session, you can rewatch it on our YouTube or Facebook channels. It will remain there, and stay connected with us by following us on our social channels and also on our website. And lastly, let us know what you think about today's session and what you want to hear about next in the upcoming Startup Coffee Chat. Just scan the QR code or link, or visit the link, and we'll be selecting 5 lucky winners to receive some virtual gifts. So don't forget to check your inbox next week. Until then, stay tuned for our upcoming events on our website and social channels, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great weekend.